1. Setting the scene. Hey there, business enthusiasts. Ever found yourself at a networking event, clutching your coffee cup like it's a shield, wondering how those super networkers make it look so easy? Well, I've got news for you. Those networking wizards you admire, they were once exactly where you are now. But here's the fascinating part. They discovered something that transformed them from wallflowers to master connectors. And today, I'm going to share those secrets with you. You see, just last week, I witnessed something remarkable at a major tech conference in Silicon Valley. Picture this, a young software developer, barely 2 years into her career, managed to land 3 potential client meetings and a job offer, all during a 30-minute coffee break. How? Not through fancy pitches or aggressive selling, but through the art of sophisticated small talk. And trust me, it wasn't just luck. Did you know that according to recent business psychology studies, 85% of job positions are filled through networking? Even more intriguing, 72% of people report feeling uncomfortable during networking events. Yes, even those confident-looking CEOs. But here's what's really going to blow your mind. The most successful networkers aren't necessarily the most extroverted or the most experienced. They're the ones who've mastered what I call the connection code, a set of subtle but powerful communication techniques that will unlock together in this episode. Think about it. Networking happens everywhere, not just at formal events. That chance encounter in the elevator with your company's CEO, that's networking. That casual chat while waiting for your morning coffee, that's networking too. Even that brief exchange on your morning commute could be the beginning of your next big business breakthrough. In fact, some of the biggest business deals in history started with simple small talk. Take the $35 billion merger between 2 major tech companies that began with a casual conversation about kids' soccer games at a parent-teacher conference. But here's what makes today's episode different. We're not just going to talk about networking theory or give you a list of tired old icebreakers. Instead, I'm going to take you behind the scenes of successful networking conversations. We'll decode the psychology, master the techniques, and most importantly, transform the way you think about professional small talk. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why some people seem to build instant rapport with strangers, how cultural nuances can make or break your networking success, and most importantly, how you can develop these skills yourself. We'll explore everything from reading body language to mastering the art of the graceful exit, and I'll even share some embarrassing networking failures from my own career that taught me valuable lessons. Trust me, they're both cringe-worthy and enlightening. So, whether you're an introvert who dreads networking events, a seasoned professional looking to refine your skills, or someone who's just starting their career journey, this episode is going to be your game changer. Grab your notebook because you're about to learn the secrets that turn awkward small talk into meaningful business relationships. Ready to transform your networking game? Let's dive in. 2. The ice-breaking game. Now that we've set the stage, let's tackle what many consider the most nerve-wracking part of networking, those crucial first moments of a business conversation. You know that slightly awkward feeling when you spot someone interesting across the room, the way your mind races through potential opening lines while simultaneously imagining all the ways things could go wrong? Well, I'm about to share something that will completely change your perspective on this. Let me tell you about Alex, a finance professional who used to break out in a cold sweat at the mere thought of initiating conversations at industry events. One day, he made a fascinating discovery. He noticed that the most successful networkers weren't using generic openings, but instead were carefully choosing their conversation starters based on their industry and context. For instance, at a fintech conference, instead of commenting on the weather, they might say something like, "What's your take on blockchain's impact on traditional banking?" Instantly, they're in a meaningful conversation. Here's what's really interesting about the psychology of first impressions in business settings. You have approximately 7 seconds to make that initial impact. But here's the game changer. People aren't actually judging you on your eloquence or wit. Research shows they're primarily assessing two things: your warmth and your competence. That's why industry-specific openers work so brilliantly. They demonstrate both your knowledge and your genuine interest in the other person's perspective. Speaking of timing, let me share a little secret about group conversations. You know those clusters of people chatting at networking events? There's actually an art to joining them. Watch for what I call the triangle opening, when people in a group naturally shift their stance to create a space for others to join. That's your invitation. And here's a pro tip. If you see someone standing slightly outside a group circle, they're usually looking for an opportunity to join too. That's your chance to make two connections at once by bringing them into the conversation. But what about those moments when things don't go quite as planned? Let me share a personal story that still makes me chuckle. I once tried to impress a potential client by commenting on what I thought was their recent company merger, only to realize I had confused them with their competitor. Instead of trying to backtrack, I turned it into a learning opportunity by asking about their perspective on industry consolidation. Remember, it's not about never making mistakes. It's about how gracefully you recover from them. Here's something fascinating about different business sectors. Each has its own conversation culture. In tech startups, it's perfectly normal to ask about funding rounds and burn rates. In conservative banking circles, you might want to start with market trends and regulatory changes. In creative industries, leading with questions about recent projects or inspirations often works best. The key is matching your approach to your audience. Think of opening conversations like a chess game. Your first move sets the tone for everything that follows. But unlike chess, there is no single best opening move. Instead, you want to develop what I call a conversation starter portfolio, a range of openers that you can adapt based on the situation. Throughout this episode, I'll help you build that portfolio, complete with recovery strategies for when things don't go as planned. And here's something most people don't realize. The best conversation starters often aren't even questions. They're observations that invite discussion. Instead of, "What do you think about the keynote speaker?" try, "The speaker's point about artificial intelligence reminded me of some challenges we're facing in our industry." See how that naturally invites the other person to share their perspective without putting them on the spot. So, are you ready to master the art of breaking the ice? In the next section, we'll build on these foundations and explore how to keep these conversations flowing naturally. 3. Keep the ball rolling. Now that you've mastered those crucial first moments, let's dive into what I consider the real art of networking, keeping that conversation flowing naturally. Think of it like a dance where sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, but it's always about maintaining that smooth rhythm. And trust me, this is where the magic really happens in building professional relationships. Remember Sarah, the VP of marketing I mentioned earlier? She uses what I call the story bridge question technique. Here's how it works. She shares a brief, relevant story, bridges it to her conversation partner's experience, then asks an engaging question. For instance, after discussing supply chain challenges, she might say, "We faced similar issues last quarter and found an innovative solution through blockchain. What kind of technological solutions has your team been exploring?" Notice how this creates a natural flow while demonstrating expertise and genuine interest. Let's talk about something that many people overlook: the power of names and details. I recently witnessed a CEO at a conference who remembered not just people's names, but specific details from conversations they'd had months ago. His secret? He wasn't born with a supernatural memory. Instead, he uses a technique called triple encoding. When he meets someone, he repeats their name immediately in conversation, visualizes it written down, and associates it with something unique about them. John from cybersecurity, who loves vintage motorcycles, sticks much better than just John. Right? But here's where it gets really interesting. Active listening in business conversations isn't just about nodding and maintaining eye contact. It's about what I call conversational breadcrumbs. When someone's speaking, they're constantly dropping little hints about topics they're passionate about. Maybe they mention digital transformation with slightly more enthusiasm, or their eyes light up when discussing team culture. These are your golden tickets to deeper, more meaningful conversations. Here's a fascinating tidbit about business conversation psychology. Studies show that people remember only about 25% of what they hear, but they remember 75% of how you made them feel. That's why I teach what I call the echo and elevate method. When someone shares an insight, echo their key point to show you're truly listening. Then elevate the conversation by adding your own perspective or asking a thoughtful follow-up question. Let me share an embarrassing but enlightening moment from my own career. During a high-stakes networking event, I was so focused on thinking about my next clever comment that I completely missed an important detail in my conversation partner's story. Instead of trying to fake it, I used what I now call the honest reset technique. I apologize, but that point you made about market expansion really intrigued me. Could you elaborate on that? This authenticity actually led to one of my most valuable business relationships. Now, let's talk about the art of topic management. Professional conversations are like a river. They should flow naturally, but sometimes they need gentle guidance. I've developed what I call the river technique. Relate, investigate, value add, expand, and redirect. For example, if a conversation about market trends starts becoming too negative, you might say, "That's an interesting perspective on the challenges. I've noticed some innovative solutions emerging in this space." This keeps the conversation constructive while maintaining engagement. Here's something crucial about professional humor. It's not about being funny. It's about being appropriately lighthearted. The rule of thumb I always share: business humor should be like salt in cooking, just enough to enhance, never enough to overwhelm. Self-deprecating humor, when used sparingly, can be particularly effective in making others feel comfortable. For instance, sharing a mild professional mishap that led to a valuable lesson. But what about those moments when the conversation starts to lose momentum? This is where having what I call a conversation emergency kit becomes invaluable. These are tested, reliable topics that can reinvigorate any business discussion. Industry innovations, professional development experiences, or even well-known business case studies. The key is to deliver them naturally, as if they just occurred to you. As we move forward, I'm going to reveal some advanced techniques for reading subtle conversational cues and adjusting your approach in real time. 4. The cultural dance. Now, let's dive into what I like to call the cultural dance of business networking. And trust me, this is where things get really fascinating. Imagine you've just mastered the perfect handshake for your New York business meetings, only to learn that you'll be networking in Tokyo next week. Suddenly, you're in a whole new ballgame, aren't you? Let me share a story that changed my entire perspective on cultural networking. A brilliant tech executive I know once lost a $1 million deal, not because of his product, but because he jumped straight into business talk at a networking dinner in Singapore. He didn't realize that in many Asian business cultures, relationship building comes first, business second. The fascinating part, his competitor, who spent the first 20 minutes discussing family and cultural interests, walked away with the contract. It's not just about what you say, it's about when and how you say it. You know what's really mind-bending about international business networking? Time itself means different things in different cultures. I discovered this the hard way in Brazil, where showing up exactly on time for a networking event actually meant I was unfashionably early. Meanwhile, in Germany, arriving 5 minutes late could be interpreted as a sign of disrespect. These aren't just quirky cultural footnotes. They're the invisible strings that pull at the fabric of business relationships. Here's something that blows my mind. Scientists have identified over 700,000 different physical signs humans use to communicate, but their meanings vary dramatically across cultures. Take eye contact, for instance. In North America, strong eye contact shows confidence and engagement. But try that same approach in some parts of Asia, and you might make your conversation partner incredibly uncomfortable. The trick isn't to memorize every cultural rule, it's to develop what I call cultural flexibility. Let me introduce you to what I call the cultural communication triangle: verbal, nonverbal, and contextual communication. Each culture places different weights on these three elements. For instance, in the UK and US, verbal communication often carries the most weight. But in Japan, contextual clues, like who speaks first or where people sit, might be just as important as what's actually said. Digital networking has added another fascinating layer to this cultural dance. Did you know that the meaning of a brief pause in conversation varies dramatically on video calls across cultures? In some Nordic countries, comfortable silence is normal and respected. In other cultures, it might be interpreted as disinterest or technical difficulties. I once watched a brilliant professional deliberately use these cultural pauses to create deeper connections in international video meetings. Here's a game-changing tip about volume and personal space in business networking. Imagine everyone has an invisible bubble around them. The size of this bubble varies dramatically by culture. In the Middle East, Close proximity might signal friendship and trust. In Northern Europe, the same distance might feel invasive. I've developed what I call the step-back test. If your conversation partner takes even a tiny step back, you've probably entered their cultural comfort zone. But here's what's really incredible about modern business networking. We're seeing the emergence of what I call global networking fusion. It's this beautiful blend where professionals are creating new hybrid networking styles that work across cultures. For instance, the traditional Japanese business card exchange ritual is being adapted worldwide, but with modern twists that make it accessible to everyone. The secret weapon in cross-cultural networking, it's not perfect knowledge of every culture. That's impossible. It's showing genuine curiosity and respect. I've seen people recover from major cultural faux pas simply because they demonstrated sincere interest in learning and understanding. Remember, you're not expected to be perfect, but you are expected to be respectful and adaptable. As we move forward, I'm going to share some specific techniques for reading cultural cues in any business situation. 5. The graceful exit. Now, let's tackle what I consider the secret sauce of networking success, the art of the graceful exit. You know that feeling when you're trapped in a conversation, checking your watch, and desperately looking for an escape route? Well, what if I told you that ending a conversation could actually be the beginning of a valuable business relationship? Let me share a fascinating story about Maria, a senior executive who transformed her networking game with what she calls the connection close. At a recent tech conference, instead of the usual "I need to grab a drink" escape, she ended each conversation by highlighting something unique she'd learned from the person and suggesting a specific way to stay in touch. The result, her follow-up meeting acceptance rate skyrocketed from 20% to 85%. But here's the really interesting part. It wasn't just about what she said. It was about how she orchestrated the entire exit. Think about this. Research shows that people remember the last 30 seconds of an interaction more vividly than the previous 30 minutes. That's why I've developed what I call the peak end strategy. The idea is to create a small but memorable peak of connection right before you end the conversation. For instance, referencing a specific detail from earlier in the chat. Before I connect with some other folks here, I'm really intrigued by your perspective on AI in healthcare. Would you be open to continuing this conversation over coffee next week? Here's something that might surprise you. The best exits often start about 3 minutes before you actually leave. I call this the soft close technique. It's like planting little seeds that will naturally bloom into a graceful conclusion. Maybe you mention an upcoming meeting or reference other people you need to connect with. But, and this is crucial, you do it while maintaining genuine engagement in the current conversation. Let's talk about group conversations because they're a whole different ballgame. You know those networking circles that form at events? I've discovered what I call the orbital exit method. Just like a spacecraft uses gravity to slingshot around a planet, you can use the group's natural dynamics to smoothly transition away. The key is to gradually shift your body language while maintaining verbal engagement, then waiting for a natural pause in the conversation. Now, here's a common scenario that trips up even seasoned networkers: the digital connection exchange. I've seen brilliant professionals fumble with phones, cards, and QR codes, losing all their conversational momentum. That's why I developed the bridge and build technique. Instead of an awkward pause while swapping contact info, use this moment to build anticipation for future interaction. Your insights about market trends are fascinating. While I get your LinkedIn details, what's the best way to continue this conversation next week? But what about those situations where you're genuinely enjoying the conversation but really need to move on? This is where what I call the value exchange exit comes into play. Instead of just ending the conversation, you create a reason to reconnect. For example, I have to head to another meeting, but I'd love to share that research paper we discussed. Should I send it to you on LinkedIn? This transforms what could be a goodbye into a see you later. Here's something crucial about promise-keeping in networking. Every exit commitment is a trust deposit in your professional relationship bank. If you say you'll send an article or make an introduction, treating that promise like a binding contract can set you apart in today's networking landscape. I've seen careers built on this kind of reliability. As we wrap up this section, I'm about to share 3 revolutionary exit strategies that work in any business context. Let me tell you about my most embarrassing exit attempt that turned into a valuable lesson. I was at a London finance forum, trying to gracefully leave a conversation when I accidentally knocked over a water glass. Instead of letting this awkward moment derail me, I used what I now call the recovery bridge, turning an awkward moment into an authentic connection point. As we wrap up this section, I'm about to share 3 revolutionary exit strategies that work in any business context. 6. Digital age networking. Welcome to the brave new world of digital networking, where your laptop screen has become your conference room and your smartphone is your networking venue. But here's what's fascinating. While the platforms have changed, the psychology of meaningful connections hasn't. Let me show you how to master this digital dance. Remember that awkward silence in virtual meetings when someone forgets to unmute? Well, what if I told you that some of the most successful digital networkers I know actually use these moments strategically? Take David, a startup founder who turned what could have been an embarrassing unmute moment into his signature move. He now deliberately takes a second to unmute, using that pause to create anticipation before delivering his key points. It's become so effective that people in his network now call it the power pause. Here's something mind-blowing about virtual networking. Studies show that we process digital facial expressions 30% faster than in-person ones. Why? Because our brains are working overtime to compensate for the lack of full body language cues. This is why I've developed what I call the digital presence triangle: voice modulation, facial expressiveness, and strategic movement. Master these 3 elements, and you'll have people forgetting they're talking to a screen. Let me share a story about a virtual networking disaster that turned into pure gold. During a major online conference, my internet crashed right in the middle of a crucial conversation with a potential investor. Instead of panicking, I quickly switched to my phone's hotspot and messaged everyone. Technology is teaching us resilience today. Shall we embrace the adventure? That moment of authentic vulnerability actually led to deeper connections than a perfect presentation ever could. Now, let's talk about the art of virtual small talk. It's not just about asking, "How's the weather there?" anymore. I've pioneered what I call context mining, using visual and digital cues to create meaningful conversation starters. Notice a unique virtual background. That's your opening. Spot an interesting book title on their shelf. There's your conversation starter. These environmental cues are like digital golden tickets to deeper connections. Here's something fascinating about online relationship building. The most successful digital networkers use what I call multi-channel presence. They might start a conversation in a virtual event, continue it on LinkedIn, share insights via email, and maintain the connection through occasional social media interactions. It's like weaving a digital tapestry of professional relationships. But let's address the elephant in the virtual room: screen fatigue. I've developed a technique called energy injection points for virtual networking. Every 7 minutes, introduce something that shifts the energy. A relevant anecdote, a thought-provoking question, or even a brief silence for reflection. I once watched a master networker use this technique to keep a group of 50 executives engaged in a virtual roundtable for 2 hours straight. Virtual icebreakers have evolved too. Forget the tired old, introduce yourself to the group routine. I'm talking about what I call digital connection catalysts. For instance, starting a virtual meeting by having everyone share their most recent professional aha moment or biggest current challenge. These create instant points of connection and make virtual small talk feel natural and purposeful. Here's a pro tip about digital business card innovations. The most successful networkers aren't just exchanging contact info, they're creating what I call value bookmarks. When you share your digital business card, include a specific note about how you might help the other person. Great, discussing AI ethics with you. I'd love to share our recent research on this topic is much more memorable than a simple contact exchange. As we wrap up this section on digital networking, I'm about to reveal the most powerful virtual networking technique I've ever discovered. It's something that completely transformed my own online networking success. And it's so counterintuitive that most people never even think to try it. 7. Practice makes perfect. Now we've reached what I consider the most exciting part of our journey together, turning everything we've learned into action. Because let's face it, all the networking theory in the world won't help unless you actually put it into practice. But here's the thing, practicing networking doesn't have to feel like a chore. In fact, I'm about to show you how it can become the most enjoyable part of your professional development. Let me tell you about James, a brilliant software engineer who was terrified of networking. He started what he called his micro-networking challenge, committing to just one meaningful professional interaction each day. It could be as simple as a thoughtful comment on a LinkedIn post or a brief chat with someone new at the coffee machine. Within 3 months, he had built more valuable connections than in his previous 3 years. But here's the fascinating part. It wasn't the quantity of interactions that made the difference. It was his systematic approach to learning from each one. I've developed what I call the network learning loop, a 4-step process that turns every interaction into a learning opportunity. First, you plan your approach. Then you execute the interaction. Immediately after, you reflect on what worked and what didn't. Finally, you adjust your strategy for next time. It sounds simple, but this systematic approach has transformed even the most reluctant networkers into confident connectors. Here's something that might surprise you. Some of the most successful networkers I know actually keep what I call a conversation journal. Not just recording who they met, but documenting specific phrases that worked well, topics that generated enthusiasm, and even body language cues that created rapport. One CEO I work with credits this practice with doubling her business development success rate in just 6 months. Let's talk about what I call progressive networking challenges. Think of it like a video game. You start with easier levels and gradually work your way up. Level 1 might be striking up a conversation with one new person at your company. Level 5 might be hosting your own professional meetup. The key is celebrating each small win along the way. I've seen people transform from networking novices to natural connectors by following this graduated approach. Now, here's a game-changing concept: feedback loops in networking. Most people think networking success is hard to measure, but I've identified 5 key indicators that you can track: response rate to your follow-ups, quality of conversations, network diversity, referral frequency, and what I call your reunion factor, how often people seek you out at events. By tracking these metrics, you can actually see your networking skills improve over time. Let me share a story about my own practice journey that changed everything. I used to dread industry conferences until I developed what I now call the conference simulation technique. Before any major event, I would practice potential conversations with different personality types. But here's the crucial part. I wasn't just rehearsing words. I was developing the ability to read and adapt to different communication styles in real time. Here's something powerful about practicing networking. Every single interaction, even the ones that feel awkward or unsuccessful, is actually building your professional relationship muscle. I've developed what I call the Recovery Repository, a collection of techniques for bouncing back from networking mishaps. Because let's be honest, even the most skilled networkers sometimes slip up. It's not about being perfect, it's about being resourceful. As we wrap up this section on practice, I'm about to share what I consider the ultimate networking practice technique. Something so effective that it transformed my own networking ability within weeks. 8. The power of personal branding. Let's dive into what might be the most underappreciated aspect of networking success: your personal brand in conversation. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't personal branding just about LinkedIn profiles and business cards? Well, buckle up, because I'm about to show you how your conversational brand can become your secret weapon in networking. Picture this. I recently watched 2 professionals at a tech conference approach the same group of potential clients. Both had identical credentials, but one walked away with 3 meeting requests while the other left empty-handed. The difference? Something I call their conversational signature. The successful networker had developed a distinctive way of sharing ideas that made every interaction memorable. She didn't just talk about AI. She told stories about how AI was transforming real people's lives. Here's something fascinating about human psychology. People remember how you make them feel long after they forget what you said. That's why I've developed what I call the voice principle. Values, originality, interest, clarity, and energy. Each conversation you have is an opportunity to demonstrate these elements of your personal brand. For instance, instead of saying, "I work in software development," try, "I help companies turn their biggest tech headaches into their greatest advantages." Let me share a personal story that revolutionized my approach to networking. Early in my career, I tried to be what I thought a professional networker should be: formal, serious, and full of industry jargon. It was exhausting and ineffective. Then I discovered what I call authentic brand voice, the sweet spot where professional expertise meets genuine personality. Suddenly, networking became energizing rather than draining. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Your elevator pitch isn't just about what you say, it's about the conversation you start. I've pioneered what I call the story hook bridge technique. You start with a brief story that captures attention, add a hook that creates curiosity, and then build a bridge to your listener's interests. One entrepreneur I mentor used this to transform her standard, "I'm in cybersecurity," into an intriguing conversation about how she helps companies sleep better at night. But personal branding in networking isn't just about talking. It's about listening in a way that becomes part of your brand. I call this branded listening. It's about being known as the person who asks the most insightful questions, who makes unexpected connections, who helps others articulate their ideas more clearly. One CEO I know became famous in her industry not for her speeches, but for her ability to ask questions that changed how people thought about their businesses. Here's something crucial about modern networking. Your online presence needs to align with your in-person brand. I've developed what I call the digital-physical harmony principle. When someone looks you up after meeting you, and trust me, they will, they should find a consistent story across all platforms. But here's the key. This alignment should feel natural, not staged. Let me tell you about the most powerful personal branding technique I've discovered, what I call value visibility. It's not about self-promotion. It's about consistently demonstrating how you can add value to others' success. In every conversation, look for opportunities to share insights, make connections, or offer resources that align with your brand and expertise. As we wrap up this section on personal branding, I'm about to reveal the 3 most common personal branding mistakes that can sabotage your networking efforts, and the simple but powerful adjustments that can transform these potential pitfalls into your greatest strengths. 9. Networking in challenging situations. Let's tackle what many consider the Mount Everest of networking, those particularly challenging situations that can make even seasoned professionals break into a cold sweat. You know what I'm talking about. Those moments when you're the only non-native speaker in the room, or when you're an introvert at a high-energy networking event, or perhaps when you've just made what feels like a catastrophic faux pas. But here's the exciting part. These challenging moments often lead to the most memorable and valuable connections. Let me tell you about Ming, a brilliant software engineer who moved from Shanghai to Silicon Valley. At first, she was terrified of networking in English, but she developed what I now call the language bridge strategy. Instead of viewing her accent as a barrier, she turned it into a conversation starter. "Excuse my English. I'm still learning, but I'm passionate about AI and would love to hear your thoughts," became her signature opening line. The result? People were not only understanding, but often went out of their way to engage with her authentic approach. Here's something fascinating about introversion in networking. Research shows that introverts often make stronger one-on-one connections than extroverts. Why? Because they typically excel at deep listening and thoughtful responses. I've developed what I call the quiet impact strategy for introverted networkers. It's about creating meaningful connections through quality rather than quantity. One introverted CEO I know built her entire professional network by mastering the art of asking just one insightful question in every conversation. Now, let's talk about recovery from networking faux pas. Those moments that make you want to disappear through the floor. I've created what I call the recover method. Recognize, evaluate, correct, observe, verify, evolve, and rebuild. Let me share a personal story. At a major conference, I accidentally called a key industry leader by their competitor's name. Instead of trying to hide my mistake, I used it as an opportunity to demonstrate humility and genuine interest in learning more about their work. That disaster turned into one of my most valuable professional relationships. Here's something crucial about dealing with difficult personalities in networking situations, what I call the redirect and realign technique. When you encounter someone who's being negative or confrontational, instead of matching their energy, try this. Acknowledge their perspective, then gently redirect the conversation toward constructive solutions. I once watched a masterful networker transform a complaint session about industry problems into an exciting discussion about innovation opportunities. But what about those situations where you find yourself in the middle of conflicting opinions? This is where I've developed the bridge builder approach. Instead of taking sides, position yourself as someone who can help different perspectives find common ground. One professional I mentor used this technique to become known as the go-to person for facilitating difficult industry discussions, dramatically expanding her network in the process. Here's a powerful concept I call pressure point networking, those high-stakes situations where you need to make connections under less than ideal circumstances. Maybe you're at a conference where everyone seems to know each other except you, or you're trying to network in an industry that's completely new to you. The key isn't to pretend these challenges don't exist. It's to incorporate them into your networking strategy authentically. As we wrap up this section on challenging situations, I'm about to share what I consider the ultimate networking recovery technique. Something so powerful it can turn almost any awkward situation into a networking win. 10. Building long-term relationships. Now we're diving into what I consider the real goal of networking, turning those initial small talk moments into lasting professional relationships. You know those people in your industry who seem to know everyone, the ones who can make 3 calls and solve any business challenge. Well, I'm about to show you exactly how they built those powerful networks, one conversation at a time. Let me tell you about Rachel, a fintech executive who transformed her approach to follow-up. Instead of sending the standard "great to meet you" emails, she developed what I call the value echo technique. After each meaningful conversation, she would reflect on one unique insight from their discussion and share a relevant resource or connection within 48 hours. Simple, right? But here's the fascinating part. Her network engagement rate jumped from 15% to 78% in just 3 months. Here's something that might surprise you about relationship maintenance. It's not about frequency, it's about relevance. I've developed what I call the touchpoint timeline. Instead of setting arbitrary check-in schedules, you create meaningful interaction triggers based on your contact's interests and activities. When a contact wins an award, launches a new project, or shares an industry insight, that's your cue to engage with purpose. Let me share a personal story that completely changed my approach to network building. Early in my career, I was focused on collecting as many business cards as possible. Then I discovered what I call the deep, not wide principle. Instead of trying to know everyone, I started focusing on building deeper connections with a select group of professionals whose values and interests align with mine. The result, a smaller but infinitely more powerful network that actually produced results. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The concept of network mapping. Think of your professional relationships like a living ecosystem. Some connections naturally feed into others, creating what I call value chains. For instance, one technology consultant I mentor mapped her network and discovered she was perfectly positioned to bridge the gap between startup founders and venture capitalists. This realization transformed her from a participant in her industry to a vital connector. But let's talk about something crucial: professional friendship boundaries. I've pioneered what I call the authentic balance framework. How do you stay professional while being personal enough to build real trust? The secret lies in what I call selective vulnerability, sharing enough of your professional journey to be relatable while maintaining appropriate boundaries. One CEO I know became known for sharing her lessons learned from failures, which counterintuitively strengthen her professional relationships. Here's a game-changing concept about network maintenance, what I call compound networking interest. Just like compound interest in finance, small, consistent investments in your professional relationships can yield exponential returns over time. I've developed a system called the 5-5-5 method. Invest 5 minutes daily, 5 focused interactions weekly, and 5 meaningful network building activities monthly. As we wrap up this section on building long-term relationships, I'm about to reveal what I consider the most powerful relationship building technique I've ever discovered. Something so effective that it transformed my entire approach to professional networking. 11. Industry-specific networking. Let's dive into something that can truly set you apart in your networking game, mastering the unique networking dynamics of different industries. Because let's face it, the small talk that works brilliantly in a creative agency might fall completely flat in a banking conference. But here's the exciting part. Understanding these differences can give you an incredible advantage. Let me take you behind the scenes of Silicon Valley's networking culture. I recently watched a software developer commit what would be a cardinal sin in traditional corporate settings. He approached a CEO wearing flip-flops and immediately started talking about his failed startups. In most industries, this would be career suicide. But in tech, it was pure gold. Why? Because in the tech world, failure stories are like battle scars. They're badges of honor that show you've been in the trenches. Now, contrast that with financial services networking. Here's what's fascinating. In finance, what I call the precision protocol rules supreme. One wealth manager I know transformed her networking success when she started using what I call numbers narratives. Instead of general industry observations, she would weave specific market statistics into her small talk. Have you seen the interesting pattern in emerging market volatility this quarter? Suddenly open doors that generic market comments never could. Here's something crucial about healthcare sector networking. It operates on what I call the impact first principle. Medical professionals and healthcare executives connect most strongly through patient outcome stories. But here's the tricky part. You need to master the art of sharing these stories while maintaining absolute confidentiality. I've developed what I call the anonymized impact story technique, which has helped countless healthcare professionals build powerful networks while respecting privacy regulations. Let's talk about creative industry networking. This is where I've seen the most dramatic evolution in recent years. Gone are the days of purely portfolio-based conversations. Today's successful creative networkers use what I call concept fusion, the ability to connect seemingly unrelated ideas in fascinating ways. One advertising executive I mentor became known for starting conversations with, "Here's how blockchain could revolutionize brand storytelling." The key: making unexpected connections that spark imagination. But here's where it gets really interesting. Startup ecosystem networking. This is what I call speed dating on steroids. The pace is faster, the stakes are higher, and the conversations are more direct. I've developed the rapid value exchange technique specifically for this environment. Instead of the traditional, "What do you do?" opener, successful startup networkers lead with, "What problem are you solving?" followed quickly by, "How can I help?" Now, let me share a story about a fascinating contrast in networking cultures. I once watched two professionals trying to network at a cross-industry conference. The first used the same approach for everyone and failed miserably. The second, who understood what I call industry code switching, adjusted her conversation style for each sector. When talking to tech people, she focused on scalability. With finance professionals, she emphasized risk management. With healthcare executives, she led with compliance and patient outcomes. As we wrap up this section on industry-specific networking, I'm about to share what I consider the ultimate cross-industry networking technique. Something so versatile it works in any sector while still feeling perfectly tailored to each. 12. Emergency Networking Toolkit. Let's dive into what I call your professional networking safety net, your emergency toolkit for those moments when everything seems to be going sideways. You know those situations. Your mind goes blank mid-conversation, you completely forget someone's name, or you accidentally say something that lands like a lead balloon. Well, I'm about to show you how to turn these potential disasters into networking wins. Let me tell you about what happened to Michael, a senior executive who found himself stuck in an elevator with his company's biggest potential client and completely blanked on everything he knew about their business. But instead of panicking, he used what I call the curiosity pivot. He turned his knowledge gap into an opportunity by saying, "I've been following your company's recent moves with great interest. What's your take on where the industry is heading?" That elevator ride turned into $1 million contract, all because he knew how to transform a potential awkward silence into engaging dialogue. Here's something fascinating about memory tricks in networking. Your brain actually works better under pressure when you have pre pre-planned rescue strategies. I've developed what I call the rescue protocol. Redirect, engage, source, connect, understand, and elaborate. One CEO I know uses this whenever she blanks on details. Instead of fumbling, she smoothly moves from, "Tell me more about your perspective on this," to genuine engagement, gathering information while maintaining rapport. Now, let's talk about what I call conversation CPR. Those crucial moments when you need to revive a dying discussion. I once watched a networking master turn a completely stalled conversation about market trends into a vibrant discussion by using what I call the personal professional bridge. She said, "You know, what you're describing reminds me of a fascinating challenge we faced last quarter." Suddenly, theoretical small talk transformed into engaging storytelling. But here's where it gets really interesting: the art of graceful disagreement in networking. I've pioneered what I call the diplomatic divergence technique. Instead of avoiding different viewpoints, you learn to navigate them with phrases like, "That's an interesting perspective." "I've been exploring a different angle that might add to this discussion." This approach has helped countless professionals turn potential conflicts into opportunities for deeper connection. Let me share something crucial about name recall. It's not about having a perfect memory, it's about having perfect recovery techniques. I've developed the name navigation system. When you forget someone's name, instead of awkward avoidance, you can say, "You know, I remember our fascinating discussion about AI at the last conference, but I'm drawing a blank on names today. Could you help me out?" This honest approach often creates more authentic connections than pretending to remember. Here's a game-changing concept about backup topics, what I call your conversation catalyst cards. These are your pre-prepared, industry-relevant topics that you can pull out when the conversation needs a boost. But here's the key: they need to be both timely and timeless. For instance, how is your company approaching the balance between AI innovation and ethical considerations? This question worked 6 months ago, works today, and will work 6 months from now. As we wrap up this section on emergency networking tools, I'm about to share what I consider the ultimate networking recovery technique. Something so powerful it can salvage almost any networking situation. 13. Networking metrics and goals. Let's dive into what might be the most revolutionary aspect of modern networking: measuring and maximizing your networking success. Now, I know what you're thinking. How can you measure something as intangible as networking? Well, get ready, because I'm about to show you how the most successful networkers in the world quantify and amplify their relationship-building efforts. Let me tell you about Patricia, a management consultant who transformed her networking approach using what I call the impact matrix. Instead of counting business cards collected, she started tracking meaningful conversations using 4 metrics: immediate value exchange, future opportunity potential, knowledge gained, and relationship depth. But here's the fascinating part. Within 6 months, her client conversion rate tripled, not because she was networking more, but because she was networking smarter. Here's something mind-blowing about networking ROI. Research shows that professionals who systematically track their networking efforts are 4 times more likely to build valuable business relationships. I've developed what I call the Value Velocity Index. It measures not just how many connections you make, but how quickly these connections turn into meaningful professional relationships. One sales executive using this system found that his most valuable connections often came from his third-degree network. People he met through people he met. Now, let's talk about what I call network diversity scoring. Think of your professional network like an investment portfolio. Too much concentration in one area creates vulnerability. I once watched a tech entrepreneur completely transform her business by using what I call the sector spread strategy. She discovered that having connections across different industries didn't just create more opportunities, it provided unique insights that her competitors, stuck in their tech bubble, completely missed. But here's where it gets really interesting: the quality versus quantity debate in networking. I've pioneered what I call the deep connection quotient. Instead of measuring how many LinkedIn connections you have, you measure the percentage of your network that you could call at 8 p.m. with a business emergency. One CEO I mentor found that focusing on deepening relationships with just 20 key contacts generated more value than maintaining superficial connections with 200. Let me share something crucial about setting networking goals, what I call the cascading objectives framework. Starting with your ultimate professional goal, you work backward to identify exactly what types of connections you need to build. For instance, if your goal is to enter a new market, you might need 3 industry experts, 2 potential partners, and 1 mentor with relevant experience. This targeted approach transforms networking from a random activity into a strategic pursuit. Here's a game-changing concept about measuring networking success: the relationship momentum monitor. It's not just about tracking connections made, but monitoring how relationships evolve over time. Are your professional relationships becoming stronger? Are they leading to more opportunities? Are you becoming a valuable node in other people's networks? These are the metrics that truly matter. As we wrap up this final section on networking metrics, I'm about to share what I consider the ultimate framework for measuring networking success. Something so powerful, it has transformed how industry leaders think about professional relationship building. 14. Conclusion. Your next steps in networking mastery. Well, we've been on quite a journey together, haven't we? From those first nerve-wracking moments of starting a conversation to building lasting professional relationships, we've uncovered the art and science of business networking. But here's what I want you to remember: every master networker started exactly where you are right now. Think about everything we've explored together: the cultural nuances of business small talk, the power of authentic personal branding, those crucial recovery techniques for awkward moments, and even how to measure your networking success. But here's the real gold. Networking isn't about being perfect. It's about being genuinely interested in connecting with others. Let me leave you with what I call the 3 golden keys to networking success. First, authenticity always wins over perfection. Your genuine interest in others is your superpower. Second, every conversation is an opportunity, not just to advance your career, but to learn something new. And third, remember that great networking is a skill, not a talent. The more you practice, the better you'll become. I want you to do something right now. Think about your next professional event or meeting. Pick just one technique we've discussed today. Maybe it's the story bridge question technique, or perhaps the cultural communication triangle. Commit to trying it out. Remember, you don't have to implement everything at once. Small, consistent steps lead to remarkable results. 15. The next step is yours. If you found value in these networking insights, I'd love to hear about your experiences and questions. Remember to hit that like button if you've learned something new. Subscribe for more professional development content, and share this with someone who might benefit from these networking strategies. Your comments and feedback not only help our community grow, but also shape future content. Until next time, keep connecting, keep growing, and remember, every great business relationship started with a simple hello.